Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Barry Kostrinsky, president of the Artist Talk on Art, the ATOA. The ATOA is a 501c. We've been around since 1975, hosting live talks in New York City since then, usually on the Lower West Side. You can see our past talks on our YouTube channel, which is under the full name Artist Talk on Art. And if you go to our website, you can see our archives, which are held with the Smithsonian, the American Art Institute. I'll get the initials. It's an AAA initial, but the link is on our website, and that has our full archives going back to 1975. Our goal is to have artists talk on art, to share, and we encourage interaction. Before we start, I do want to thank Olga Alexander. This talk really originated when Olga sort of was a part of and enjoyed Nathan Langston's Playing Telephone, which is the focus of tonight's talk, the title being Playing Telephone, an intersemiotic game of art forms. Don't worry, Nathan will spend 30 minutes explaining exactly what that means. And so thank you, Olga. And that's what this is about. It's about artists here spreading the word, sharing, coming up with a theme that they'd like to present, reaching out to us, telling a friend. And that's how we've grown. And that's sort of our telephone of our organic growth. And I'm very happy with it. So thank you, Olga. And of course, I want to thank Nathan just for putting this together, and our three presenters, Lora Robertson, Sylvia Suple, and Diana Kurtz. Thank you all for coming. And of course, all our participants. We have a very nice group here. I want to thank you for your time. As I always say, it's your most valuable commodity. It's the one that's in limited supply. And unless you see a movie where you can buy time in the future, we're in the present and our time is limited. So thank you all. Again, I'm going to hand it over to Nathan so Nathan can introduce this talk. Feel free to use the chat with any questions you'd like to ask or statements, even if you just want to say, wow, beautiful work. This is about an interactive relationship between the speakers, the presenters, and very much a mutual supportive group. But don't let you think we do not get deep in the art here. The questions run deep, and I think you'll enjoy what we come out with. So without further ado, Nathan, you've got half an hour to explain Playing Telephone, an intersemiotic game of art forms, and welcome from Seattle, Nathan.
Oh, it's so nice to be here, and just such an honor to get to talk with everyone. And it's one of my favorite things to do is to talk about this game, and I could talk about it for 5 hours, but I will try to keep it brief because I actually think that what will be most interesting about this is not even necessarily the game itself, but like what process the artists went through in order to play the game. So it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be with Lora Robertson and Diana Kurtz and Sylvain Suklaye. Am I saying that right, Sylvain?
Sylvain Suklaye.
Suklaye. All right.
I mean, I live in Denmark for 7 years and they call me Sylvain for 7 years. So it's okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, I murdered your name and apologies for that. But such an honor to be with you and to get to hear a little bit about the work you did for this. So these are 3 artists of almost 1,000 artists from 493 cities in 72 countries that played this game of telephone with us over the course of a year. Starting in March 27th, I think, of 2020. And then we published it in April of 2021. It's online. Anyone can look at it. It's free to the public in perpetuity. And it cost us about $150 to do. although it's just a ridiculous labor of love. So first off, I'll explain kind of some of the rules for how the game was played. And everybody knows the game of telephone, the children's game in which you start with the message and then you whisper that to the next person, who whispers it to the next person, who whispers it to the next person, and the message changes and mutates and evolves as it is being passed from person to person. It's in the States, it has other names. It can be called phone book. It can be called grapevine, ear to ear, operator, but it's also played ubiquitously throughout the earth. It's known as piramide or telefono roto, telefono descompuesto, telefon chavur, steel post. I mean, this is played everywhere on the earth, partly because it's free to play, and it's super simple, and it's funny, and it also expresses something that is very human in terms of how we communicate with each other and miscommunicate with each other. And I have found that the game itself can be traced at least to the 1700s. At that point, it was a game amongst the aristocracy. It was like a parlor game for rich people, and they called it Consequences at that time in Europe. But probably the game is much older than that, partly because nobody needs to write down the rules to telephone. It's so easy. So there's not really like a written record for how old the game actually is. I mean, certainly when I was a kid and like played it at school or at church or with friends or something like that, nobody actually wrote down the rules for me. Like an adult probably told me how to play, which in a way makes the game of telephone itself a game of telephone, because it was passed from generation to generation, just telling kids how to play this thing. Beyond that, it has been used by other artists before. We're certainly not the first folk to latch on to this as like a principle or like a framework. You know, the Dadists, for example, Andre Breton and crew back in the day, they were playing Exquisite Corpse, which is very much using telephone to see how something changes. But, you know, it was popular at times in the Bauhaus, Black Mountain College, the Fluxes movement. They played around with stuff like that. And that's just stuff I know. I'm sure that there are somebody smarter probably on this call knows other movements and other groups that have taken this and made it their own. So we played it with several variations. So the first one is that instead of just passing a message from person to person, just whispering it from ear to ear, we decided to pass it from art form to art form. So you could start with a message, which could become a painting, and then the painting would become a poem, and the poem would become music, and then film, and then dance, and then sculpture, and no forms were ruled out. But what's great is that you can see the information, the packet of information within each as it mutates and becomes something else from form to form. And it does give you some insight into what forms are good at, what they're bad at, what they can do, all that kind of stuff. And just like watching how the forms are interrelated and connected. So that was a big one for us, is like just making sure that It wasn't just poem, photography, poem, photography, poem, photography. We were looking for as much diversity within each thread as possible. The second thing that we did different is that instead of just whispering it to one person, from one person to one person, every time that we got a finished work back, we tried to assign that to 2 or 3 other artists. So you would start with one message, it would go to numerous artists, and each one of those finished works would go to numerous artists. So what you have is this branching out, this exponential growth of the various threads from the original message. One great thing about that is that if you assign a poem to a musician and to a sculptor and to a painter, then you can compare and contrast the various works to each other and see how those artists went about trying to, trying to turn that into their own work and pass it on, pass the message on. So it expanded for about 6 months until it got to the 6th generation from the beginning. And in the 6th round, there were about 270 artists or more in that round, at which point we switched the process. So we just reversed it. We said, okay, from now on, we're going to send every single artist 2 or 3 finished works of art, tell them that these do come from the same place, but now we're asking you to synthesize these things and trying to put them together. What do they have in common? Try to find what they have in common and express that through your own work. So at that point, in the second half of the game, the game started to contract exponentially, growing together. So what you had after about a year is we started with one single message. We passed it through a network of more than 900 artists. And then it concluded with a single work of art.
What?
So yes, that is what we did. I mean, you got to do something during COVID, right? So
Hey, let me ask you,
Yes.
what was the idea? What gave you the impetus to start this project?
All sorts of different impetuses, or impeti. I don't know what the plural of that is. Anyway, the one of the big ones was a novel by Herman Hesse called The Glass Bead Game, alternately published as Magister Ludi. And that is basically about a game that it's a fictional game. It's set in the future. And the game itself is not super well described in terms of its rules, but it is about a game that people play that is a synthesis of all art forms. And he started that book in, I think, 1932. And then he published it in 1944. And then it won the Nobel Prize in 1947 for literature. And I actually just finished reading it again, and it's beautiful. But that's one of the inklings. Another one was that I was just lonely. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to get people together.
Yeah.
And especially during COVID, this was really important because it's a very, as you'll see, it's a really intimate process to take somebody else's artwork, figure out what you feel it means, and then take it into your own heart and actually do something with it. I mean, as far as relations with strangers go, and most of our players were strangers to each other, this is a pretty intimate form of interaction. And it was one that we could do, that we could play this whole project without meeting in person. doing it entirely via the internet.
I have a question.
Let's see if, yes, of course.
That's okay. I'm a little bit confused. Is language used in the beginning of this, or is this all visual, sound, everything else but language?
Nope, language is included. The message for this one, the original message was in language.
Really?
But in terms of, we allow poetry, we allow prose, definitely. And both of those were instrumental to this game as well. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Well, I guess I don't know what you're presenting, but will there be a point that we'll get to hear what those sentences were at the very beginning?
Yes, indeed. And that is a perfect segue, in fact. Let's see if I can share my screen here so that all of you can look at the exhibition of Telephone that was published in April of this year. So let's see what we got. Can everyone see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So this is the homepage of the Telephone exhibition. And I think, Barry, you may have said this is Nathan Langston's project, but that's not really true. I'm the director of it, but we had a team of 10 people that probably put in 10,000 hours over the course of the year to work on this. None of us were paid. There's no money involved in this game whatsoever. And all of the artists that played, they still own their artwork, and they also still own the digital rights to their own artwork. But they donated their time, and they donated their artistic labor to creating this. I mean, it's a labor of love for sure.
Well, none of the artists were paid. That sounds like the art world in a nutshell. But then again, it also reflects the generosity of artists and the willingness to give and to participate. But as a result, you've created a network, quite a network, almost a neural network in a way. And so I applaud you and your 9 other associates that made this happen.
Well, and I hope the weather is okay in New York, because I'll be there tomorrow and trying to meet all my friends out that way. So a good place to start is in the search category. And this gives you all of the artists that played. And just to give you a little bit of a look at the number of artists that played Telephone over the past year. It keeps going and going. Each one of these people is a real person in a real place that created a work of art within the game of Telephone. But you can also do things like you can search. So I can search Lora. There you are. So we'll be hearing from Lora later. So you can use the search. You can also filter. So if I filter to music, for example, you can see the 110 musicians that played Telephone. So you can look at it that way. Another fun way to look at Telephone is just geographically. So you can look at this map of the world and see where all of the various artists were located. One dot does not necessarily mean one artist. So if we go to your neck of the woods, you know, for example, in this part of New York, you can see that there's actually many, many artists that played that said that they were from New York. You know, you've got your Brooklyn, etc. And it just gives you a sense of like where folks are actually located throughout the globe. But Barry, what you were talking about in terms of like a neural network, I think you called it, which I think is a very good metaphor, in fact. You can look at the game map. So this is the map of the Telephone game and like how everybody is related. so you can see, if we zoom in right here, this is the original message that we started with. And you can see that it was passed to numerous other artists. There's Dustin, you know, and each one of these nodes are color coded. So you can, if you wanted to just see, let's say literature, then these are where the written word are.
Nathan, I'll ask the obvious question. What was that original message?
Well, we'll get to it. We'll
Okay.
get to it. I'm teasing this. I'm done with it. It'll be, yeah, I'm building tension. So so you can see that that here is the original message, and this musical work right here. Maybe we have to zoom in a little bit to be able to like click on it. This is the last work, the final work of music, which was a composed musical piece by a composer in Hong Kong, Priscilla Chu. So you can see kind of the size of it, and each one of the, you know, basic rudimentary categories of the game are color coded to help you. So if you wanted to just listen to all of the music, you could see how they're connected specifically.
So some of the artists had to make work contingent on sometimes less transformations of the piece than other artists.
Yes, artists only knew what directly preceded their own work. And
but there were a certain number of artists that got, let's say, the first shot at it.
Yep.
And then they gave it to a lot more people. So some people were making work that had been diffused so many times.
Yes, that's right. And from looking at this network, you can see that it's from beginning to end, it is 14 rounds, 14 generations.
Right.
And people did not know where they were. So you weren't told that the last player, Priscilla, I did not tell her you're the last person in the game. And it has been 14 rounds since the beginning. People only knew what was whispered to them or basically emailed to them as an assignment.
Oh.
So we can look at, so if you were to go to the exhibit portion, you can, and I'll just start this over a little bit. So this is the original message. Alexander's men were certainly the first Europeans known to have seen a banyan tree. They were amazed. The vivid descriptions they wrote would inform Theophrastus, the father of modern botany back home in Greece. More than 1,000 years earlier, the people of the Indus Valley civilization adopted a stylized banyan as a symbol in their script. So that is what the first artists got. That's where we started. And it is it's a message by a ecologist named Dr. Mike Shanahan in the UK. And he studies figs and fig trees and what they mean. But this is how we started the entirety of the game. And this is not a good message in certain ways, and in certain ways it's a great message. It's a lot of information. So that's very difficult to translate, especially in a short amount of time. Like Theophrastus, I have no idea how anybody would actually pass that through their own work other than actually writing that name down. So that wasn't long for this world in this particular game. On the other hand, the banyan tree is amazing because it's a perfect, it has to do with branching out. It is a tree that kills its host when it's first growing. Also, just the way that it grows, these trees can grow to be about 10 acres, 10 square acres, and from afar, they look like a forest of trees because of the way that they grow, but they're not. It's just one tree. It's just one tree that takes up an entire city block. And I think that there is something to that in terms of telephone, in terms of we should love each one of these art forms and celebrate each one of these art forms as its own thing, and each one of the artworks within telephone as its own thing, as a singular thing. But then secondarily, we should understand that all of these artworks are just one work of art. And that at a certain level, all of these forms of art are all kind of trying to do the same thing, but in different ways. They're trying to convey information. They're trying to convey something emotional or an idea or something to somebody else. So they're natural allies. And when you throw a party with painters and poets and musicians and writers, that's such a much better party generally than one with just poets or just painters. Like, it's good to mix them up. We're thinking 1920s Paris, right?
Nathan, I just want to interject a second. Betsy Marr says incredible work just designing the presentation, doing the coding. It was an unforgettable experience to participate. Very nice. And an artist did ask, was it mostly virtual? And I would assume, given it was through COVID, all the communication was through virtual methods, correct?
That's correct. In fact, until I go to New York tomorrow, a lot of the people that I actually worked with over the course of a year, I've never actually met them. So we worked together almost every day for a year, and I haven't ever hung out with them in person, but hopefully that will change soon.
Jill Gerwitz says it easily fostered a sense of connection during COVID. And I can't applaud you enough for doing that, because COVID was a time we all felt disconnected. We literally could not see each other. So you sort of bridged a gap there, sort of a need that needs to be filled.
Yeah, well, I needed it too. It had to happen for me too. I don't think I would have gotten through the last year or so without having this community of people and this project to work on.
Nathan, I was just curious because as somebody who participated in both iterations, can you talk about how the original iteration of telephone differs from this one and how it grew, or what are there any differences?
Sure. So we did play this game in 2015, was the first game of telephone that we played. About 315 people played that one. That one began with the Breton fisherman's prayer, which is, "Oh God, thy sea is so great and my boat is so small." So that was the beginning of that game. And that game just grew exponentially. And we just let it grow wild and grow exponential until we had too many artists and we stopped. This game, because it starts to coalesce, we were really interested in how artists synthesized numerous prompts at the same time. Because that's a big part of what art history is. Art history doesn't go in a straight single line. Each artist is probably listening to music while they paint, and they just read a book that is on their mind, and they've been watching binging like a television show or something. And all of those forces are influencing them, and they're metabolizing them into something that is like their own mixture. So that was one of the big differences, is like the structure, I would say.
Nathan, shall we jump to Lora Robertson, or you want to go ahead? Just I'm trying to keep moderating the time, that's all.
So just the last thing I would say is that you can in the exhibit, you can choose basically your own pathway through the exhibit. And there are hundreds and hundreds of pathways. So you can, you can move through and pick the way that you want to go. And you can see that each individual one, you can see where you are on the map. You can also see geographically how the message has been passed. And then if you want to, you can go into each work of art, read a little piece about what that person says about their process. You have a bio. We asked everyone to send a picture of where they were, and then we have where they were on a map, and then where they are on the game map. So that is kind of how the exhibition works. But as Barry wisely recommends, I have all sorts of different theories about this, and I've been working with folks at Brown University and Free State University in South Africa, and then Smith College, some institutions in Europe. Really smart people are trying to figure out what happened, like what is actually going on here and how it can be useful to various studies. And I've got my own ideas. However, I have never actually played it. I've never actually, as an artist, done the work, like received an assignment and gone through the process of translating that. So we will start with Lora. There you are, and bring this up. And so Lora is an artist I worked with for a good long while in New York. And we've worked together on ballets and modern dance and all sorts of different projects. But she made this film, and we're just going to play like an excerpt from it. And hopefully you will be able to hear the sound. So. So Laura, I'm gonna stop it right there. Obviously, you can see that there is a lot more to this film, and I would recommend that everybody actually listen to it, especially so that you do not have the sound of traffic outside my window going along at the same time. But Laura, are you there?
I am. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm happy to have you here too. So can you describe kind of the process of like what it was like to get your assignment and then to start making this film? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I was so mad at you. When I first opened the email, I responded to a work of long form poetry that had very dense language. And the first time I read it through, I started to panic. My heart dropped because I had a week to produce a film in response to this poem that I could make no sense of. So I read it about 20 more times. I printed it out, marked it up in red all over the place. Finally, after about 48 hours, I asked Nathan for an additional week. So I was granted 2 weeks, and I don't know how many artists actually had to ask for extra time, but I wouldn't be surprised if I wasn't the only one. The sense of urgency to create something that's good in a very compressed amount of time is terrifying. It was for me anyway. And so instead of responding directly to this poem, which would have taken a year probably, I tried to tune into the frequency of what was happening in the work instead, and really kind of developed this sense of responsibility to find the originating message. And keep in mind, I had no idea at what step in the process I was in. I didn't know if I was in the beginning or the middle or the end.
And just so people know, Lora was actually pretty close to the beginning. So
yeah.
I think there were only 2 artists that preceded her. So she was very, very close to the beginning. Yes.
And if I had to guess from the poem, I would have guessed that I was much later in the process. So again, I had this incredible sense of responsibility just to find the originating message and give the other artists a chance to find it too, and just to give the message itself a chance to make it to the end intact, which made me think, well, maybe there's some artists that are deliberately obscuring the message, just to make it fun, or just to be subversive. I don't know. But I was determined to find this message. And there are some clues, looking retrospectively back at this poem, there are some clues in the poem that would tell me about the message, but those are not the clues that I listened to. And I think it's really interesting. We had to keep the secret for a year. We couldn't really talk about it to anyone. And Nathan kind of introduced us via email to some of the other artists, maybe midway through the process, I think. But we were sworn to secrecy and could not talk about it. So I was on my own and in the dark and very confused. But somehow I managed to extract some very vivid imagery that have everything to do with the originating message. And I had to set my own process aside and really tune in to, I think certainly the pandemic did help. And it was a point in the pandemic where I was just itching to do some work, itching to connect with people, really needed that. And so I sunk my teeth into this project really wholeheartedly, because it was the only thing I had going on at that time. And I was spending a lot of time on my property in the woods, trying to connect back to nature. And you're going to see a lot of that in the film. I also included a soundtrack of Bells Ringing Down. That's actually the name of the film, Bells Ring Down. And just to give like a sense of patience, we will get through this. It kind of forces you to be in the moment, I think, when you're listening to a sound and waiting for it to dissipate. You know what's going to happen, but instead of waiting for the end, maybe just enjoy the notes as they happen. So yeah, I frantically filmed for for 12 days and then frantically edited for 2 more and came up with this film. Had no, and gave it to Nathan just almost with an apology. I had no idea. And then his reaction to it, he was floored. So it was an incredible sense of relief. I knew I was on the right track, but still I was gonna have to wait another year before I knew exactly what intersections I had achieved, which ones I had overlooked. And so finally, when all was revealed, I was quite happy with what I came up with.
Well, and what did you think once you saw it? Because yeah, we tore the curtain off the whole thing, so everybody learned everything all at the same time in April. But like, what did you think about like what came before and what came after you? Like, what was the feeling there?
I was shocked. My mouth dropped open. Because some things became so important to me, some images, you know, I have these trees on my property that are interlinked, they're intertwined at the root system. They're kind of holding each other from falling over a cliff. They've been there for a very long time. And, you know, there's not a lot of imagery. There's imagery of trees in this poem, but there's not the banyan tree in particular. And so I thought that was an intersection that was pretty powerful. I included the red cape with the boat. And of course, that has everything to do with the naval officer.
In the poem, yeah.
In the poem, But as far as what came before me, I think there's Olivia's poem, and then before her, there's the originating message. So I was very surprised to be that early in the process. But what came after, you know, I saw a lot of struggle. I can't imagine trying to respond to my film. It's not, it's very abstract.
So here is a work in Japan that came from yours. Beautiful work. And then the other one that came was this painting.
Yes.
This is, how did you feel when you, how did you feel when you saw this one? Like,
this one puzzled me. I didn't know what to think. I still don't know what to think about that one. Yeah.
I know. It definitely has your blue butterflies in there. Definitely has the, you know, the water and the reflection and the, but where did this elephant come from? You know what I mean? And the house out in the middle of the water, like, yeah, I definitely, with both of the works that came from yours, I puzzled on them for a lot. I love them, but like, what is happening? Like, how did somebody watch your film and think this? Anyway.
And so, you know, in that sense, I kind of felt like I failed these artists that came after me, because the originating message is maybe there, but it's not too obvious. But then the originating message, if you follow the website, it picks up again very strongly in many other different places. So you really have to think of the game as a whole, and not so much, you know, the step up ahead of you or the step behind you. And you're creating that frequency that people can tune into, and then create work from that space. So.
So interesting. And I'm so sorry that we ruined your life there for a little bit. Basically, this game is about causing pain to artists unexpectedly throughout the world. Diana, what are you there? I'm here. How are you doing? So this was your work?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about this.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for including me, or I was lucky enough to find you or whatever. It was a perfect piece to work on during the pandemic. I found it sort of hard to continue work that I was doing beforehand, and I was sort of at loose ends. And then this poem arrived in the email, which gave me some problems, meant, you know, I had to think about it. And what was interesting for me is I try to paint basically from the world around me for things that I see with my own eyes. And this was a piece of paper, some words, which I saw with my own eyes, but there were no images. And the name of the poem was Owls and Quarantine. And I really, thank you so much for sending this poem. I've been painting birds on and off for a number of years. I never painted owls. I don't know that much about birds, actually. I'm a city person, live in New York, lived in the city all my life. And I've always thought owls were so pretty. I mean, of course, I see the owls in Hieronymus Bosch, and they're different kinds of owls. But according to this poem, the owls are really treacherous and very bad. And so I tried to be a little bit literal following the poem. And I have a few phrases which I can read from the poem, and you'll see how I interpreted it. But I was really happy to be able to paint owls. These images came from various places on the internet. That's where I got my imagery. Of course, they were changed around a little bit. And I tried to make each owl a little bit different. They're different species, or I guess breeds of owls. And I tried to give them kind of different expressions, different psychological expressions. According to the poem, these owls are harbingers of death. I think they're very cute. And I tried to have some that were like the big one in the bottom. I mean, try to make, I mean, these are all probably life size and over life size, by the way. I mean, it looks a little bit different in real life because you have to confront an owl's head that is bigger than your own face. So you have to think of the scale of this. She talked about, it's interesting, Lora talked about the trees and the banyan tree, and the trees seem to be in a lot of these works. And she talked about owls perched in a neighbor's tree. So that's why I put these tree images in. I tried to have it in a kind of amorphous space. I didn't want a realistic space because, I'll just give a few quotes from the lady's poem, the woman who came before me. I've been seeing owls in lockdown, perched in my neighbor's tree. Then she wrote, I've never feared them. When an owl spoke your name, you died. Then she said somewhere, there's some other words. Then she talks about permanent twilight. And that's what I tried to create, some kind of a twilight. Is it evening? Is it towards evening? Is it early morning? Is it like night that somehow we can see through? She calls it a ghost-like light, or ghost light. And she talks about the owls as being not cuddly, and it was a parliament. And I think especially the bottom one on the right, I thought he was kind of cuddly. And she also mentions that above, their wings were silent as a pandemic, circling above us like angels. And those are the two owls above. And I didn't want to do the whole image of looking up or looking down. I wanted us face to face with the owls, so they come into our own space. And I guess it's a little bit similar to the way I usually paint. So that's how I arrived at this imagery. And the person who before me, I want to give her credit. I can't find her name right now.
Oh, I can look it up right here.
Janine Hall Galley from Redmond, Washington.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here was your piece.
I tried to be, I tried to follow her poem as much as I could. I tried to be as literal as I could with what she said. And I hope that maybe I conveyed what she was trying to convey, except I think maybe my owls are not as deadly as she would have liked. But
well, here's one question for you. So, well, first an observation and then a question. So the observation is this: is that we found birds all over this game, from beginning to end. And my supposition of that is that if you give a picture of a tree to a musician, they will automatically think of incorporating bird sounds for the sound of the tree. And same goes for filmmakers and stuff like that. Like if you're doing a tree, the sound of a tree is the birds in it. And so naturally birds start to be introduced, and yours is not the only thread that had lots and lots of birds. I mean, there are birds everywhere. But the other thing that I was interested in was there, with the poem that you got, there was so much of the pandemic influencing it, not necessarily coming straight from, you know, the literal message that was being passed. People were also experiencing the pandemic. Like, did you feel that? Did you feel that the pandemic was also like influencing your work here?
Do you mean the pandemic in terms of the poem, or the pandemic in terms of the way I was feeling?
Well, both. I mean, yeah, both.
Well, for me, as for many other artists, painters, and I've discussed this, we're very used to spending a lot of time alone in the studio. It's not as if we have very social jobs or with a lot of other people. So in that sense, it was not that different. I mean, I do spend a lot of time alone in the studio. However, I didn't paint as much during the pandemic as I usually do, even though I had more time alone in the studio. And what was the other question about? What was the other? You said there were two.
No, just the ways in which the
pandemic.
pandemic.
And also,
yeah.
I think my nature, I don't know if it's my nature, what it is, my tendency is, even if sometimes I paint very, very difficult subjects, very sad subjects, like the 13 years of my life, I painted only in the theme of the Holocaust. I try not to make very depressing paintings, if that makes any sense. I mean, in terms of my paintings, even on that terrible, dreadful subject, I mean, people could look at them because they were not so, I don't know how to explain it. Try to be more positive. That's the right word.
Yeah.
I don't know how, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you. And let's talk about that some more. Lastly, we'll look at Sylvain.
I do want to jump in. There is a comment from
Sure.
Wendy Friedman asking Diana. She's very curious, Diana, about the imagery in the center of the painting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I tried to. I didn't know how to make the kind of space that the poet described. She called it. She just, the way she described it was like an amorphous space, and I didn't want to have it a literal space, and I wanted it sort of to kind of disappear as if this goes on for infinity. So so there's a trace of a bird in the middle, and basically that was because I couldn't erase the mistake that I had made, or was in the wrong place, but I decided to leave it. So you can think of the space as going on infinitely further and further back without any parameters, no top and no bottom and no sides. And that's why I kind of put the two red pieces on the side to kind of enclose this amorphous space. I don't know if that answers the question, but
It's beautiful though.
thank you.
Very nice. Before we continue, Nathan, I just want to remind everybody, this is ATOA, the Artist Talk on Art. We're a 501c3. All of our talks are free. We do appreciate your contributions, and you can find information on how to through our website, atoanyc.org. I also want to recognize several board members who really do the work behind the ATOA who are here. First of all, Cameron Saltzman, not a board member, but our intern who's involved with the organization. Doug Shear, whose name came up earlier, an early founder of the group who's been involved since its inception. Jacqueline Rada, who's been a powerful member, as her past husband has been, of the ATOA. And of course, Roberta Bernardi, who's involved with our group. So special shout out and thanks to them for making the ATOA what it is. Sorry to jump in like that. Go ahead and continue.
Can I just add something? I would like to talk about the person that was sort of considered my sibling, the other one that came out of the poem. We had two people that had to interpret it, myself and another person who was a musician. I thought his piece is fantastic. I don't know, I think he's from Texas, I'm not sure, but he did a wonderful interpretation that was parallel to my painting. So I just wanted to, kudos to this person.
Yeah. Was it this one? The
No, it was music. I don't know the man's name. It was
yes.
music. I think it was this.
Yep.
Yes, it's that one. I think those were the words. I think it's this one.
Well, no, and that is something that we didn't highlight it as much as I'm interested in it personally, is seeing if you send the same work to 3 different people, they would be considered siblings, right?
Yeah.
Because they all share the same parent. And comparing the differences, like there are some deep synergies and like weird, I think Laura's word was frequency. I think that they share a frequency together, and it isn't necessarily like a specific exact one-to-one translation. But if you saw them at a family reunion, you would know like, oh, they're definitely related, you know? So let's have, Sylvain, are you around?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, friend. So let's just have a little listen, and hopefully the sound quality will be okay. And apologies if it's not. But we'll listen to a little bit of this, and then just talk about the audio work that you created for telephone. So here we go.
Another shots. Another shouts. Another shouts. Another shouts. Russian roulettes, white Russian, endless road, eat and run. Us, that's what we are. Us, invisible and vibrant. Remnants beyond the curtains, moving under the blankets, screaming under 1,000 suns, hiding from love in caskets. Until life, until we get bored, until death, until we get burned.
So Sylvain, that is just a little over a minute of a 6-minute piece, which again, I encourage everybody to listen to in its entirety, because it's mesmerizing. Like, it put me into a weird state when I would turn it on in my apartment. It made for a very strange dishwashing experience, you know what I mean? Like, but I do hear birds in there. I hear mechanical repetition. I hear all sorts of things, including the actual poetry in the words that you're saying. Can you walk us through like what your process was and what you were going for?
So it was really an answer to the poetry Red Canoe, and I guess in the poem, she's talking about the sky, the landscape, and a lot of feelings. And I was curious about what will happen in the water, inside the water, and that's why the sounds is in the way I choose really bits of samples that will be able to go sub when you think about the base of the narrative. And for me, it was a little bit special because I took those songs in Nairobi in January 2020, and it was the last in-person residency that I attend. And it was my first time in Africa, first time in Nairobi. And I took my field recorder for doing something different, but I just record mundane sounds, just people putting their hair, the sounds of the wheels on the roads, things like that, because I wanted to have something that will be really an instant moment of what happened. And then because the residency was about archive and de-archive, and I went back in Copenhagen where I was based, which is a really clinical space. And I just choose some parts and I kept all the elements inside some folder. And I think for me, the piece is really interesting because I used to do some action poetry, but I stopped to write poetry 15 years ago. So that was the first time that I was in a way confronted to another part of a poetry, and I really wanted to respond, to answer. And it's for me as a non-English speaking or listener, it's not about the words or the meaning to start. It's really about the rhythm of the words. And I think the rhythm of that poem kind of create the beginning of the movement of my song parts. And the other part, it was the middle of the pandemic. I just arrived in New York, so you spend your time still looking for an apartment. Everybody asking you for credit history, and you never had to give that to anyone else in the world. And the only moment that I could just have some rest was when I have to compose the piece. And I was super stressed because I have a little amount of time, but I was also in that moment where I was a little bit tired of doing online performances. I'm mainly a performer, and I wanted to create a piece that will be at the intersection of sound art and performance. I wanted the piece to be really to give a bodily experience to the listeners and create kind of an intimacy. And I think that I choose to be really brief with the poetry because I wanted the people to find their space inside the words, between the layers of the music as well. And on the personal notice, less is also because I think what's the pandemic, although a lot of things last year, but I had my wedding during the pandemic. And no one from my family or family of my wife was able to attend because the frontier was closed from France to Denmark. And it's about that, that minimal moment where you are just two people. And even though you have the desire to have a small wedding, sometimes you just have a small wedding and just two people and the officer in front of you. And I think the words of the poem are the reflection of that, something extremely simple, but that is at the same time the continuation and kind of a really specific point in my life.
So two things. Firstly, the work that comes after you, I'm sure you've looked at it before.
Yes.
It's this. It's definitely some women in a canoe. And I have listened to your work so many times, and I'm like, how did the canoe make it through? How did this come from your piece? So that is the one thing that it's a mystery to me.
You never know, but I really wanted people to kind of listen the sounds like they were underwater. Mm-hmm. And just the words are not really clear, and you really have to take the time and breathe. And I think we were in a moment a year ago where people like us in the Western world, sometimes our bodies are disconnected from our minds, and we were home in lockdown, and maybe we managed to reconnect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, Sylvain, I think that you froze up a little bit there. Well, hopefully he'll pop back on here momentarily, because I was fascinated by that. And I'm fascinated by like how, oh, there you are, sir. We lost you for a second. So no, you were talking about just like that underwater feeling and the disconnect between the mind and the body in the West. Yeah,
I get that feeling that we are all in that moment, and maybe that's why we are more sensitive to a lot of news that we are reading for the last 12 months. Is just to be able that not just having the mind and the culture to decide about how we behave, how we choose to have empathy with some type of people, some population, and just being that in that primal moment, that collective moment that we are people and we all miss each other, we miss the togetherness. And maybe sometimes we needed that that moment to be able to search and have really a desire to be able to be together and have a common conversation.
Another thing that I was interested in briefly was so all artists that played telephone, we asked them to just write a description of what it was like to play. So we have this huge data set of qualitative data, I guess, subjective feelings about what it was like to play telephone. But one thing I was interested in yours was that you felt as though it wasn't a translation, really. You didn't think of it as a translation. I think that you called it a rebirth or something like that, right? Like,
yes, I think it's come from my personal experience. I'm out of my country. I'm living abroad for almost 10 years. So I don't think you translate things from one territory to another. I'm more interested about what I became when I arrived in Denmark, what I will become here in New York. And I don't try to be French somewhere else. I try to be myself more in another territory with other people. So I think the translation, because when you learn a new language, I mean, you are learning the mechanics, the details, but the culture behind the words is more important to create a connection with people. And I think it's those moments that kind of reshape who you are, what you are doing, even though you have some a mindset, or you decide you want to achieve that thing or another thing in another country. The environment are changing you, the people are changing you, the noise in New York is changing me. I'm really noise sensitive, and since I arrived, I've calmed down. I'm really at peace with noise, which is really it's the first time in my life in 40 years that I have that calm relationship with noise. So I'm a new person here.
So it's not a translation of one to another. It is taking that like essence or that frequency or something like that, and
I think the word is really reincarnation, because we have that, because part of my work is around epigenetic, and we are carrying those elements of experience, of narrative, and we are not coming from nowhere. But when we are in a new space or in a new life or new environment, I think we are growing from that seed, and that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah, growing from that seed. I really like that. Well, I have hours and hours that I could talk about the philosophies of ekphrasis and the neurological aspects of synesthesia, and the way that genetics, like the epigenetics that you were talking about in terms of passing information and translating information from generation to generation, like I could talk about that forever. But I think what I should do now actually is just shut my yap for a little bit, to see if there is any questions from anybody that is watching right now, and also questions from the artists to each other or artists to me or whatever. Like what thoughts are being stirred up right now?
Before we do that, and that's a great idea, I just want us to thank all three of the artists and Nathan. We like to clap and show our enthusiasm and just thank you. I mean, you took a very simple project, and as all artists know, simplicity leads to complexity in one step, and you really branched out and expanded, and you had an impact on artists during COVID and when we're separate and brought them together. But yes, I will say, I just want to give a note on the ATOA. We may and probably will be coming back to live talks first of the month, starting in October. We will post it on the website as soon as we know. There'll probably be first of the month talks in the beginning, and then hopefully we'll move to a more sort of aggressive program, maybe twice monthly. And at the same time, we will keep this Zoom platform going. So we have virtual talks, and we will even try and make the live talks Zoom so we can get somebody like Nathan in from Seattle. And Sylvain, I have to ask you, where are you coming in from?
I come from Lyon in France.
So Sylvain will provide the food for dinner for everybody tonight.
I can do desserts.
That'll work. So let's, as Nathan did, and also Nathan, a brilliant job of moderating. Very nice. You know, you sort of have to be spontaneous. You did a great job, and I cannot believe you kept us within our time frame, which again, very impressive. Obviously, each artist could have talked longer. I will point out that schematic that you put out of the connecting dots, you can't but see it sort of look like a vertebrae and a human form, maybe a DNA pattern that's coming out. And that's sort of an interesting analogy that comes through. Let me open it up to questions and thoughts for Nathan. Nathan, take a look in the chat. I'd rather have you read off. Jenna Lash has a comment. This way you can respond. So give a look. And as well, anybody else, we don't really raise our hands. We're artists. We sort of blurt it out. If you have anything you want to say, just jump in.
I was wondering whether visual artists were ever, you sent these things out. People didn't send it to somebody they knew. So did you ever take a visual artist, a piece of artwork, and send it to another visual artist? Or did you send it to somebody who you knew did music or literature? Did you?
In terms of painting to painting, probably not. Sometimes there were drawings that went to paintings or vice versa. And sometimes there were paintings that went to filmmakers. And both of them are obviously, they're different art forms, but they're both visual. But as much as possible, we tried to send, like, if something was visual, let's send it to somebody who's doing something linguistic, or somebody that is doing something audio or musical or something like that. So just trying to keep it as diverse as possible, because that's what we're interested in. However, anyone can play this game. It's really cheap. Everyone should steal this idea, and there are a million different ways that you could play it. Each one would illuminate something different, interesting, you know. So you could just play photography, poetry, and just doing that over and over would be amazing. Or you could send it a single work to 3 poets rather than a poet and a painter and a sculptor. And that also would be very interesting. It would just tell you different things.
I love Seattle. We are in a great place. It's a beautiful place, Seattle. And I want to say, if you consider investigating to send all these projects to the Library of Congress. It's a very unique, you know, project, even if it is, you know, inspired of previous. But I think that you have like an amount, it's so contemporary, related with COVID, and I was wondering if you thought about it.
I had not, but I will. Sylvain or Diana or Laura, do you want to be in the Library of Congress at all?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Let's see. Have you considered building, and this is Trey, a question from Trey, have you considered building a framework for school districts to use as a way to connect and encourage young artists? 100%. We already have a number of schools playing this, both in the United States, but also in Brazil, in Europe as well. Teachers just kind of latching onto this because it's a kid's game to begin with, and it's easy and it's free and all that kind of stuff. And at least one of our designers for this project from, or our developer from Google, that's kind of what they would like to do, is make like an out of the box telephone project. So you could just, here's all of the software that you need for it, and this is the way to display it. And it just, you assign it people to play, and then it just pops out a little exhibition like this, primarily for students, because I definitely think that students should be investigating this stuff. I don't know. Let's see what other questions we got here.
Nathan, I came a little late. I just have, therefore, I didn't get the beginning. Is there anything written up about this game? Did you write it which explained it exactly? Is it like a chain type of letter thing or chain telephones? It's like
Yeah.
chain letters one gets and then continues it, right?
Yeah. So
Which
probably
I never answer, but I mean, you
I'll drop
yeah.
I'll drop this in the chat. But
Right.
this is the about page of the exhibition, and it kind of explains and illustrates how the game actually works,
Okay.
and what sort of the basic rules were when we actually created it. The about page also has some really amazing essays from neurologists and professors, both here and abroad, about some different ways that you could go about thinking about this game and what it means. Yeah, and some of our presenting partners and our discussion panels and all that kind of stuff. And of course, we all thanked our moms at the end, because we pretty much did this just to impress our moms. So there you go. Good job, moms. Let's see.
Wow.
Well, it was also a great way to forge new relationships, and that opened a whole other world for me with a poet that I was assigned, and we exchanged works, and it was nice to have, his work and my work find a new home. So, thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, we've had some weird, amazing cross connections, people staying with each other and meeting each other. And I think that's a secret, maybe that's a secret desire of this, is to, because you don't know what collaborations will come out of it. And it's the same with playing telephone. You don't know what is going to happen. It's kind of organic, but you just, I hope that we at least made like a fertile environment where the possibility of further collaboration is more probable, I guess.
Right.
No.
Nathan, where's the box you dropped that in? Because I don't know how do I find it? I don't even know what it is, the box. You said you dropped it in a box.
Here is, if you can open up the chat on your video, it'll be right. Here will be the exhibition. And let me go to the about page and drop that too.
And we'll also put this on our website. We do show on our calendar events that are to come, so you can see what talks are coming. And we also do have on our website a column where you can see previous talks. And Nathan, if you email me that link, I definitely will include it on the website, sort of for everybody to see.
Oh, good. Then I get it there. Thank you.
Welcome.
See, anything else? Can you turn up the volume a bit? No, I guess not. Was Lora responding to the original message? No, she was not. She had a poem that came before her, so it was. And Lora spoke to this a little bit, but you can see here that if we start at the beginning of the exhibit and start over from the beginning and look at, it was this. So this is the work that Lora was responding to. And as you can see, it is a poem, but it is a long poem. It's gorgeous, but strange and just like, and it's very, very long. So like, that is something that artists had to struggle with, is like, what do you do when you have too much information that you're trying to translate. And Laura, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what did you mean by that, like frequency? Like what were you trying, what was the thing that you were trying to pass on?
Well, there was no way I would be able to adequately respond to the poem itself. And so I would read the poem over and over again and just get a feeling from it. And then take that feeling and think about that instead of thinking literally about the words and the construction of the poem itself. You know, this was not a script that I was responding to with film. This is more, you have to get in a different kind of a headspace. And I think that's one of the ways to be successful in playing the game. And I mean, there's many different definitions of how to successfully play telephone. You know, there's no right or wrong, but I think you do want to keep that originating message intact somehow, unless you're just going all out subversive and squashing it all together.
Well, and that was something that I felt from each one of the artists that talked today, which is basically like, it's not, I mean, Sylvain was talking about like how it's not a translation. It's like a resurrection or a reincarnation. It's something like that. Like, and Diana was saying the same thing in terms of like, she was just trying to capture the essence, or I don't know what the right word for that is in an artwork. Like, what is its guts, basically? Like, is it just information? Is it like, what is at the heart of it that you're trying to like grab and turn into your own thing?
Well, I think also like art, it speaks indirectly. I mean, it's like difference between, you know, say prose and poetry. I mean, I think any kind of art always points to something rather than described, if that's right, if I'm making sense. I mean, it's pointing to something which cannot be described any other way, maybe.
So like not a didactic thing, or
yeah.
more like a suggestion, or like,
Well, I think most art is by itself, it also points to something which we find inside. I mean, the reason we resonate, I think, with dance or music or poetry is because it points to something inside of us. And that's why we resonate. And that's the way, at least I think of it. I mean, it's not just the outward form, but it's sort of what the outward form points to in the viewer or the listener.
So I think before we jump, and we're just about at time, but I just wanted to ask each one of the artists, and Diana, we'll start with you. Like, if you have just one last comment before we hit the road.
I'm very grateful to you for making this extraordinary piece. I'm grateful that I was part of it, and I'm grateful to the person that came before me who wrote that poem. And I'm grateful, I guess, yeah.
I'm grateful for the people that came after you too. Like,
yeah.
And we'll all have that. We'll all have people that came before us and after us. Laura, any closing thoughts?
I'd love to play this game again. It makes me remember how much I love collaborating with other artists and mashing up art forms and having that opportunity to respond to other people's work. It's really enjoyable. Let's do it again.
After I sleep for about a year, that'll be fine. And then, so Sylvain, what?
I think I really like the idea to someone give me an invitation to enter into their work, their dimension, and I feel privileged about that, especially with the deconnection at that moment. And I don't know, the idea because the telephone is also about gamification, and that words belong to the video game industry. And I really like that people from the art world are giving another definition, another layer, and it's not just playing and winning and beating someone, it's collaboration.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, well, Barry, thank you so much for having us.
I think, again, nice job, Nathan, and all three artists. You know, you touched on a theme that we've been repeating here at over our 69 talks quite often. We create a hive, we create a community. And you've certainly done that. You started this project, you've touched over 900 artists, I think you mentioned. You have so many possibilities of interactions. I would say you don't even know how many things you have caused to happen and how many bonds you have built together in your hive. And it obviously keeps expanding, just the fact that you brought it into schools. We once showed the USPS project, United States Postal Service project, similar to this, in that an artist would do an artwork, send it to someone else, and then they would do an artwork on top of it, sort of evolve the work. You've taken this and you're watching the iterations. And of course, as you said earlier, well, then analysis of that, how did that get there, can be quite revealing. And maybe you're tapping into this sort of global neural network we're a part of. And somehow, if you look closely, you're seeing lights go off in different areas that artists pick up. I've mentioned this. It was you mentioned Black Mountain and the Surrealist movement that did the Exquisite Corp and Andre Breton. But at Black Mountain, they did something interesting. It's worth repeating. It was probably John Cage and Rauschenberg and some great artists before their time, but certainly in their prime. They went on stage and they all four did totally different, unexpected, spontaneous acts on stage. Then afterwards, they asked the people in the audience, what did they see? Everyone had created a different narrative for what they saw. And so similarly in your project, when an artist gets something, they sort of pick out. I mean, Lora, you made a choice to try and get to the source of the original message. Another artist might say, oh, mention trees and did this. So everybody gets to be sort of independent and free and evolve the artwork the way they wanted. And of course, freedom is a big thing for us artists. And how often do we get to do something like that? I can't thank you enough. And also everybody here in participation, joining in, asking questions. I see so many familiar faces and I see so many new faces. Become a part of the ATOA. We're artists talking on art. You're the artist. We're a platform. I think this has been our COVID response. We will be going back to live talks. We will keep this going just for the ability to bring someone like Sylvain in from France. And we've had last week, someone was on our talk from Israel. We've touched many continents. This is our effort at connecting us. We often seem like we're disconnected, but you mentioned trees and their roots, and one artist, the trees holding the other trees. Trees communicate underground. We just see the tops. Mushrooms communicate through their network that's underground. And I always have thought about, should I live outside like in Walden Pond and just be an artist creating among nature? But that's not, somehow it's in our DNA to get together in forums like this, in a project like you did, Nathan. We are a community we often don't recognize. And I love the expression of one artist where she said, art tries to point you into a way of seeing, and it also tries to do something that other things can't do. And I think that's the beauty of art. It's another language. It's quite a unique language. And Nathan, how you mix together music, poetry, visual arts, which in itself has a lot of varieties, I think is very important. You made reference to artists, let's say in Paris at the turn of the century. There was this exchange of ideas, and often our art worlds are disconnected. Music has its subset, sculptors have their own. It's really nice to see counter influences and influencing and the dialogue back and forth, because as artists, we're very similar. We look to create, we look to inspire, we look to awaken each other. And again, thanks to all of you for coming. This has been a brilliant presentation. Nathan, I can't say how well you really handled moderating, and just seeing your smile there. You're a good guy, and I am the benefit of getting to know somebody like you through the ATOA and through our sort of open projects. If anyone comes up with an idea for a panel they want to do, submit it to me. We do have a programming committee now, and we will run through your idea, and we'll look to give you feedback and hopefully present it. Again, we're Artists Talk on Art. We're a 501c3. We've been around since 1975. All our talks are free. If you'd like to contribute, it's welcome. You've all contributed already just by being here. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Laura, Diana, and of course, thanks for the dessert, Sylvain. I'm waiting for that.
I will be there.
Such an honor, Barry. Thank you. Thank you for having us. I love you guys. See you later.
Nathan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.